So, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein, as always. I'm so happy to be here with you. I've been thinking a lot lately about change and balance and tools that can help us make change and feel more balanced. And at different points in our lives, we all have this kind of inner clue that it's time to take a look at what we're doing and reevaluate. Maybe make some adjustments. Sometimes they're bigger, sometimes they're less significant. And I'm going to clarify what I mean about that as we go on today in our time together. But the tool I want to share with you today, and I think I've mentioned it before, is the pie chart of your life. It's something I've used in therapy with people. It's something I've thought about a lot myself. And by the end of this episode, you'll have something that is a very powerful tool for getting clear, enhancing your clarity about where you are now and how you feel about it, where you are in your life, what you would like to be different, and what would have to shift to accommodate that, right? Because in addition to things like willpower and motivation and so forth for change, we're creatures that have, for all intents and purposes, a limited amount of time in our day, a limited amount of physical, emotional energy. There are lots of things that go into having a life that feels balanced for each and every one of us. And sometimes until we take things out of our minds, right, where they're just kind of they're not tangible, and until we put things down on paper, it can be hard to get clear and move forward, right? Because things can feel overwhelming, important changes, even just not earth-shattering changes, but changes to our daily routine, changes at a particular stage of life can feel overwhelming. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But again, by the end of the episode, hopefully you'll have a tool that you really enjoy. You might want to go get a notebook or a journal or a piece of paper and a pen, because as we're chatting today, certain things might come to mind and you might have an aha moment and you might want to sketch the pie chart of your life. And it's something that if you're in therapy, you can do this in your sessions with your therapist or between sessions and bring it in. It's not a bad exercise to do even just with your partner or, maybe one of your kids. What's going on for you? What percentage of your time and energy are going to each of these things? What would you like to see take up more of the pie of your life? What would you like to see take up less? So we'll get into that. I also wanted to just, before we even get into that, give you a super quick update on something I think notable for me professionally. I know a lot of you have come to this podcast because you maybe have listened to my guided imagery and meditations, first with Health Journeys and then with Hay House. And so, my big news, if you signed up for my newsletter, you already know this, or if you follow me on social media. But if not, I made a decision recently, and this actually relates to the pie of our lives things, right? Because we can think about career, and that's a slice of the pie, and creativity, that could be another slice of the pie. And we could take any one of these slices and further break them down into their own pies, right? And see, what do we want more of? What would we need to devote less time and energy to, and so forth, to feel happy and balanced? So, along those lines, and some people will think this is a bit bonkers, and I get it, but I decided to ask Hay House for, to revert the rights to my audio programs back to me. So, with the exception of one meditation on an album that also features Bell Ruth Napperstack's meditations, it's called Mindfulness Meditations. That's still at Hay House, but the other audio programs are now mine to do with as I see fit. And as some of you may know, I am probably going to retire some. A lot of them I'm thinking I'm going to remaster, change the music, re-record one track about letting go of things we don't need, relationships that aren't healthy for us anymore, behaviors, patterns, relationships with ourselves, things we want to change. That meditation is now on Insight Timer. It's a premium track, but feel free to check it out. If you do, let me know what you think. But I realized that in that particular slice of the pie of my life, I've been wanting to change those recordings for a long time. The first one came out in 2012. Again, I was so grateful for the opportunity, but I was still learning then, and I was really new to this. And, a lot of the albums, like, I think my delivery could be better. I think the wording could be tweaked. I think the music needs to be different, in my opinion, because I personally like less obtrusive music or just ocean waves. Many of you have told me that as well. So, as I remaster or re-record these, some of them I will put them in my online store. I will put them on Insight Timer. But if you want updates about that, please consider signing up for my email list, and I'll put a link in the information below in the podcast episode description. But I had to think about, is this something I want to do? What feels not quite right anymore, even if it felt right before? And that kind of leads me to, how do you know before you even sit down to create a little life pie chart and see what slices feel too big? They're taking up too much time and energy, and which ones seem too small for where you are now. A lot of times, the clue we have isn't necessarily this very clear thing like, I want to do this, or I think I should do XYZ, and this is how it's going to look. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it's this just general feeling of, something doesn't feel in balance anymore. Or I find myself feeling bored more often, or I find I don't have the same interest in my job that I used to. Or you might have been at your job for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and maybe even though it was great in the beginning, and you might love the people you work with or whatever, you might feel like, I just don't feel the same spark anymore. Something needs to change, whether you stay, whether you see if you could learn a new skill and shift into a different role, or whether you want to pursue something different entirely. And what would you need to do to make room for that change? Sometimes we'll feel this kind of, I hate to say edginess or whatever, but it's true, this dissatisfaction that's hard to put a finger on because we've entered a new season of life. And it doesn't have to be something dramatic, but it can be. So I'll use an example, and we'll get into that a little bit, and then we'll take a quick break. But a really common one for a lot of people I know right now is their kids have either moved out because they've gone off to college, or because they're adults now, they've moved out on their own. Maybe they've gotten engaged, or maybe they've moved farther away for a job. And if you have been spending the last 20 something or 30 years shepherding your children. I mean, obviously, somebody in their 20s and 30s, they're not a child anymore, even though they're your child. But going off to, even when your kid goes off to high school, but especially when they go off to college, if they're literally living somewhere else, or they get their first job and they move out, you may have spent the better part of your young adult and adult life devoting most of your energy, emotional energy, or your time to raising your child or your children. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. Um, and I think there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of physical energy and time built into that job of parenting, and parenting well, and good for you. But when you're no longer making lunches or driving your kids to school or to activities, when you're no longer kind of, I don't wanna say hovering, but in the way that, to some extent you have to a little bit when your child is, 8 years old or 10 years old or 5 years old or a newborn, obviously, you might step back and say, "Okay, now what?" And I hear women talking about this more, but men certainly go through this as well. And it's worth Maybe let's stay with this example at first. If you were to draw the pie chart of your life, what are the different slices there? What are the different main areas that are important to you? So sometimes it's good to have two circles that you're going to draw on a piece of paper. And I hope you consider doing this. And the circle on maybe one piece of paper would be the ideal or the desired pie chart for your life, right? What size is the slice for personal development? That could be going back to school. That could be taking a class. That could be learning a skill that's part of a hobby. My father-in-law does woodworking. He built a shop in his home after he retired. He does a lot of woodworking. He loves it. That takes up a much bigger slice of the pie than when his kids were in sports and living at home, and it should. How big is the slice of pie in your pie chart now, and how big would you like it to be in your ideal pie chart or your ideal one for now or the near future of something like spirituality? And I'm going to put religion into that. For some people, spirituality includes religion. For some people, it doesn't. I'm okay either way. However you choose to do it is right for you. But if you're a very religious person, you might find that you are going to services regularly. Maybe you're volunteering a lot. Maybe you are doing something else in your community, and maybe it's a kind of a large slice, right? If you are a spiritual person, but you don't necessarily have a spiritual practice that involves an organization or something scheduled outside of your normal week, and you can just decide, I'm going to have this moment to go within versus going to regular services, that might be a pretty small slice. If you are a person who is an atheist, maybe you don't even have a slice of spirituality in the pie of your life. That's okay too, right? Or maybe the spiritual part of your life is something like community service, as secular as it could possibly be. Take a look at the size of that slice relative to everything else. And you might find that you're doing some erasing. When I used to do this in my office in the city, I would have two dry erase boards next to each other so that we could kind of draw and erase and see, like, where do you want things to be and where are they now for you? If it's exercise, right? Whether it's because you want to, I don't know, fit into your old jeans, or if it's because you want to be as healthy as possible, or whether it's because it's your primary stress reduction, or all of those. How big is that slice in your pie? Now, if you are working full time or working more than one job and you're parenting and your kids are young and you're running around, that might be a smaller slice of your pie. And that might work, right? That might be fine for you. But your kids leave home and maybe you'll decide you want to do something else. Maybe you want to take up a recreational sport somewhere. Maybe you want to go to the Y and swim every day. What else would have to shift to make time and energy for that? Sometimes a slice of your pie might seem to go away, right? Or you might add a new slice. And I don't know what that is. I mean, if you retire, your work slice of your pie might literally go away. Or it might become something that feels like more of a hobby and it becomes a lot smaller. But what most people notice when they draw this is that they can see what is really in balance for them and what may have been out of balance for a long time, right? We've talked about parenting, we've talked about jobs. If you're somebody who the pie of your life had a slice for work when you were younger, maybe you were really ambitious, maybe you were working at an incredibly demanding job or you're working multiple jobs, maybe that's like a fifth or a quarter or a third of the pie of your life. And maybe that felt in balance back in the day. Maybe it never felt in balance, but in order to balance the finances slice, you had to do that. And maybe you're at a point now where even though you had been working like that, you don't want to do that anymore. And again, retirement is a time when people often shrink what they devote to any kind of work. Some people do work part-time or they consult or whatever, but it's important to say, if I want this slice, whatever it is, maybe it's a relationship slice. If I want that to be in better balance for where I am now, how would it have to look? But you get where I'm going with all of this. I'm going to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's chat more about the pie of your life and finding balance. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. So, the pie of your life, what is it that would make you ultimately happier, healthier, maybe wealthier? I don't know. What needs to be fed more in your life, right? I mentioned spirituality. For some people, that might mean meditation. It might mean prayer at home. It might be becoming part of a community if you weren't. Health might mean starting a different type of exercise program. It might be devoting more time to that. Education, that might be something that, again, if your kids are out of the house now, or maybe you're going back to school, or maybe you're finishing a degree you started but didn't finish earlier. Maybe you're switching careers. But everything affects everything else in this pie, in the sense that if you just remove a slice, there's space there. There's no such thing as a nothing part of your life. There's no such thing as a nothing part of your day, even if you think that. And I'm going to clarify that. But if you have free time where you're just relaxing and watching TV and that's how you relax, you might decide to very consciously build that in and say, this is an important thing for me to do to unwind, and that's what I want to do. If it's meditation, that might be how you do that. If it's meeting friends for lunch, that's the social part of your pie or part of the social slice of your pie. Great. Whatever it is. But there's no such thing as a space that doesn't have something. The non-doing is still doing, or the not super, it's everything doesn't have to have an earth-shattering purpose. And in fact, we need aspects of our lives that give our brains and our bodies chance to just be or reset or enjoy themselves. I mean, and if that means sitting in your favorite chair and reading a book for an hour a day, that's completely worthwhile. But the point of this is that the pie of your life is what feeds you. It feeds and sustains you, right? I know I'm kind of stretching the metaphor there, but it does. Maybe it is like something that you felt you didn't have time to have a pet when you were younger and working more, your kids were young or whatever. And maybe this is time for you to volunteer at an animal shelter or adopt an animal, give an animal a home, and give yourself the opportunity to connect in that way. By the way, I think that's one of the highest forms of service. Pet people tend to be the best people, in my opinion. I know everybody's not a pet person, but things that we do to make the world better beyond ourselves, that is the service part of the pie. Over time, maybe that becomes a little bit bigger slice of your pie. But it's really up to you. There isn't one right way. And you're kind of feeling like, it feels like it's time to shift is something worth listening to. The pie just really makes it all clearer. I'm going to tell you too, romantic relationships, whether you have one and you want to devote more time to that, you also see that over time where, or at different times in your life, when you're young and single, that might be a very significant part of the pie of your life. That might take up quite a bit. Dating, going on dates, investing in a relationship, traveling together, whatever it is, the time and energy for the relationship the slice can get kind of smaller when you are pulled in a lot of other directions, as we all are at different points in our lives. If you have gone through something where you have gone through a separation or a divorce, if you have been widowed, that affects that romantic portion of your pie, that slice. And you might feel for a while that you're not ready to invest a lot of time in cultivating and sustaining another relationship. The slice of that pie gets smaller. And usually, what happens is people take time to do personal development. Again, maybe they go back to school, or maybe they take up a hobby, or maybe they travel more, or maybe they spend more time with friends and family. Perfectly legitimate. Those slices get bigger. When you decide that you either want to breathe new life into a relationship you already have, and this can be for friendships as well or family relationships, but I'm just using romantic ones as the example. Maybe you're ready to start dating again. Maybe you're getting remarried, whatever it is. Now that slice of your pie is more significant. And again, maybe other things have, there are slices that have gone away or shrunk. Your pie might look very different sometimes 6 months from now than it does now. One of the most striking things I think about doing the pie chart exercise, though, is that we can be really out of balance beyond just necessity, but because we're in a rut, we have a habit, or we have maybe a health issue or a mental health issue that is taking up an inordinate amount of the pie, and it's not great, right? And sometimes it's something that is, we would say clinically significant, right? So a clinically significant mental health issue means it's something that if you went and saw a provider, they would give you a diagnosis and advise that you work on it and lay out a plan for you to do so. Those things are also parts of the pie of your life. And some of the most dramatic moments, I think, I mean, not intentionally dramatic, but the most pivotal moments that I've noticed people having, even in therapy, have been when they have drawn the pie of their lives. Again, work, relationships, spirituality, health, positive health behaviors, and so forth, hobbies, recreation. But the mental health issue also is a slice of the pie, or the physical health issue, right? So if you are somebody who, I'm just going to use a physical health issue example, but if you're somebody who has a kidney issue and you are on dialysis, that's going to take up a big slice of your pie, and everything else is going to need to adjust. Maybe there's a slice of your pie that's a relying on other people slice, and maybe you didn't even like having that before. But mental health issues are, I feel like they fall in their own category of the way they change the pie. I don't think mental health issues are necessarily easy to change. And so please know I'm not saying that. And everyone that I'm thinking of who has really taken a look at this just happens to have been in therapy, but sometimes people are, sometimes people aren't. But I'm thinking back to, I'm going to give you an example. There's certainly more than one person who fits into this example. This is a very long time ago. I'm not giving you any information that I shouldn't, but I'm thinking of more than one person who, in doing the pie chart exercise of the life they want to have, right? Drawing that out and seeing where romance and job satisfaction and all this other stuff, maybe emotional stability was a slice of the pie they want to have. And then drawing the pie in terms of all of those things that are going on for them now. Again, with some slices they might not be there yet, and the slices of the issue, right? So if you are super anxious to the point where it's hard for you to get out and do things, maybe you're super socially anxious. Here's just one example. That might be a massive slice of your pie, and your relationship slices, your recreation slice, all the other slices might be smaller than you would ideally like them to be, because the anxiety piece is preventing you from getting outside and getting out of your home, or socializing, or applying for a job, or I'm sure you can think of a million things that anxiety can interfere with, right? If you have an eating disorder and your weight is too low, and again, my disclaimer is this is not to replace therapy. This is something that can be a part of therapy and self reflection. But I remember at least one person who drew the pie of their lives as they wanted it to be, and then drew the current pie. And in that current pie, we talked about, there should be a slice for the behaviors you do to keep your weight inordinately low, right? Whatever that was. Maybe that's exercising 3 hours a day. Maybe that is making sure that you can only eat certain foods. And maybe that's a mental energy piece. And maybe there's another slice that is the amount of time spent thinking about weight and weight loss and worrying about being overweight, even though you're quite a bit underweight and so forth. I'm thinking of somebody too whose weight was low enough that they didn't need to be in the hospital or at a treatment center, but once your weight gets too low, your physical health absolutely suffers, your concentration suffers. You don't have the energy for certain things anymore. You don't have the ability to focus, literally, like you can when you're appropriately nourished and so forth. And I'm just thinking one example where somebody really wanted to hold down a full-time job and find a romantic partner. So those were slices that were more prominent in the ideal pie of your life. And really, there just was no room for them in the current pie because so much of the day, emotionally, mentally, and just time wise, was focused on being like, I'm going to say like 20 pounds underweight, which is pretty significant. And until that moment, we just weren't really able to make a lot of progress. And when somebody looked at this and saw that that issue encroached on all of these other slices of the pie, that was a really important turning point. Now, again, I'm not saying that this exercise alone is curative. I think people are complex. I think when people have serious mental health issues or any serious issue, it's important to seek appropriate help and treatment. What I'm saying though is sometimes the insight, that aha moment, doesn't happen until we take all this stuff out of our minds, where it's kind of unformed sometimes. It's like this running commentary inside of us, but it's not something we realize is taking over everything until we see it in a concrete way in proportion to everything else in our lives. And actually that was a turning point for more than one person that I can think of, right? If you're somebody who's got a problem with gambling and you're spending a lot of time gambling and a lot of your money gambling, and your relationship slice is really small and your family slice is really small because it's not healthy, because there's not enough energy for it, right? Or your financial security slice is really way smaller than it should be. That can motivate somebody to want to get the help that they need and focus on making steps that are really hard because they see that the life that they ideally want isn't possible while this other thing is taking up so much of the pie. And that's kind of what I'm meaning by that. You get the idea. So, what I would say is if you're feeling that, again, you're in a new phase of life, a new season of life, and it's not that anything is dramatically wrong, but it just doesn't feel quite right anymore. And you're feeling that kind of restlessness and you can't quite put your finger on what needs to change, or maybe you have a sense of what needs to change, but it's really hard getting enough motivation to make the steps, or it feels unclear how the change you want to make, how you would even fit that into your daily life. What would need to be less? What would there need to be less of, right? This can really help it make it so much clearer. And I guess I just want to kind of put a bow on that. Some of the simplest things can really be the most powerful. Don't discount that. Everything doesn't have to be a slog. Everything doesn't have to be so hard and so weighty. That simple doodling and drawing the pie of your life and just noticing what it looks like now and noticing what you would want to shift, you can do that without judgment and you can do it with compassion. And I encourage you to do it with as much loving kindness as you can because I've said it before, this life isn't about us being perfect. No one is, even if it looks like they are on Instagram or whatever. It's just not how it works. Sometimes it's just the passing of time and the passing of a season of our lives that necessitates some sort of change. And for you, it might just be a small shift in an area or two. But that small shift sometimes can make the difference. It can make all the difference. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you give it a try. And as always, if you enjoyed the podcast in general or this episode specifically, please do like, share, follow, leave me a comment, tell a friend. It really does help me bring more helpful content to you. And as always, until next time, be well.